In the last video, we thought about the structure of the Earth and we talked about igneous rock. And you remember igneous rock was this rock that comes from either magma cooling inside the Earth or lava cooling outside the Earth to form igneous rock. So today we're going to learn about a different type of rock called a sedimentary rock. Okay, so let's imagine that we've got the side of a mountain. Okay, this is the side of a mountain. All right. Now, on this mountain, obviously the mountain is more made of rock. Okay, that's probably going to be, it's likely to be a type of igneous rock, especially if this is actually a volcano. It could be some extrusive igneous rock on the outside of the mountain. But whatever type of rock it is, what we're going to do is we're going to show how this rock can form another type of rock called sedimentary rock. So it's important in this video that you're thinking about how different types of rock can transform into other types of rock, and that's happening all the time. So we have this idea of rocks being completely unchanging, but that's not true. They're always moving, they're always changing into other types of rock. So let's imagine we have here on the side of this mountain this bit of rock here. Okay, now over time this bit of rock is going to break up into pieces, all right, into smaller and smaller pieces, and it's going to break off. Okay, now that happens through a process called weathering. All right, and we'll talk a bit about weathering later, but for now, you just need to understand that weathering is going to break this bit of rock off the side of the mountain. Now, that rock is then going to be transported. All right, so now we're talking about transportation. Now, just how you take public transport, you might take the bus to get to school, the rock will be transported down the side of the hill, probably in rivers, so it moves along in a river, and it moves down the side of the mountain until eventually it's going to get to here. All right, now this could be the sea or it could be a lake. So it's transported all the way down the hill and it gets to the sea or a lake, and then what happens is the rock falls to the bottom of the sea. Okay, and that is a process called deposition. So deposition is the rock that has been transported from where it was weathered falling to the bottom of the sea. Okay, and you end up with these bits of rock here at the bottom of the sea. Okay, and these are going to be really tiny bits of rock because as they are weathered and as they are transported, they keep getting broken down into smaller and smaller pieces, and you end up with these tiny bits of rock at the bottom of the ocean. And then over time, more and more rock will be weathered, and more rock will be transported, and more rock will be deposited. And so you have, over time, this process of building up layers. Over time, we're constantly building up layers of these small bits of rock. And that is a process called sedimentation. Okay, so sedimentation is the process of building up layers and layers of rock that have been deposited at the bottom of the ocean. And then over time, what happens is the weight of the rocks that are building up pushes down. Okay, so imagine if you're this rock here, you've got all this extra weight on top of you pushing you down into the ocean floor. So you're getting pushed down, squeezed out. All right, so all the water around you gets squeezed out and all the rocks get closer and closer together, and that is a process called compaction. Okay, so you become more compact. Until eventually, what happens is that all those bits of rock, they get squeezed and compacted together so much that they form one single bit of rock. Okay, now it will have all these crystals of rock in it. All right, so you'll still be able to see the layers here, but it's actually formed one single piece of rock. And that is a process called cementation. Okay, now, if you go onto the internet and you type in sedimentary rock, you'll be able to see these amazing pictures of rocks where they have layers going through the rock. And that's because even though it's one single piece of rock that has been cemented together, it was originally formed from layers of sediment that have built up over time. Okay, so it's important to see that the compaction is the squeezing together of the layers, and then the cementation is when they become one single piece of rock. Okay, so that's the formation, those are the stages of the formation of sedimentary rock. So down here, this is our sedimentary rock. So what you can see is that we can start with igneous rock up here, and through this cycle we can end up with sedimentary rock. So it's probably good now if you go on the or at the end of the video, if you type in igneous rock into Google and look at some pictures of igneous rock, and then type in sedimentary rock into Google and look at some pictures of sedimentary rock, and you can see that they look very different, and that you'll know that igneous rock is very, very tough. All right, whereas sedimentary rock it's quite brittle, it will break easily, and it's usually made in layers, these layers of sediments that are formed at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, so that's the process of forming sedimentary rock. Now the only thing we need to talk about is this process of weathering. Okay, now there are 3 different types of weathering. Number 1 is physical weathering, okay? And this is things like rain and wind, okay? So just the physical force of the rain and the wind on the side of a mountain is going to break bits of rock off, all right? It's going to be very, very slow, but it does happen. But there's another type of physical weathering called freeze-thaw weathering. Freeze, okay, to freeze, to go from liquid to solid, and thaw means to melt, to go from solid to liquid. All right, and how this works is, imagine you've got on the side of the mountain, you've got this rock, and then in the rock there's a crack. Okay, so what happens is it rains, all right, and the crack fills up with water, and then overnight the weather gets really cold and the water that's gone into the crack freezes, and when that happens it expands. Okay, and because of that the crack will get bigger. All right, and then the next day it rains again and the crack fills up with water again, and then at night time it gets really cold and the crack expands, and so it gets bigger. Okay, and then the same thing happens again. All right, and it fills with water, but this time it breaks so much that, so it expands again, but this time what happens is when it expands it just breaks off that big chunk. All right, so this chunk here will just break off. All right, and then that will be transported down the side of the mountain. Okay, so that's freeze-thaw, this continual process of freezing, melting, freezing, melting, freezing, melting, opens up cracks, makes them get bigger. Okay, so those are your different types of physical weathering. Now, next type of weathering. Okay, the next type of weathering is biological weathering. So let's imagine you've got your side of your mountain here, and on the side of your mountain, you've got a tree. Okay, growing on the side of the mountain. Now, what happens is the roots of the tree grow into the mountain. And as they grow into the mountain, they're going to do the same thing. All right. So you can imagine that you might have here is the side. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay. You might have a root that goes in here. Okay, so this is the root of the tree. Goes into the crack in the rock. And then as that grows, okay, it's going to push the rocks apart. All right, and it's going to do the same thing. Because it's pushing this crack wider, it's going to break that bit of rock off. So that's biological weathering. And your final type of weathering, number 3, is chemical weathering. Okay, and this comes in the form of acid rain, which we've already learned about. Okay, now rain normally is very, very slightly acidic. Okay, so this will happen even without any pollution, but pollution makes the rain more acidic, so it makes it worse. All right, and all this does is the acid in the rain will dissolve the rock. Okay, and once it's dissolved the rock, the water with the bits of rock in it that's been dissolved in it will go into the rivers and be transported down the mountain to the sea where it is deposited. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is, any parts of that you're not sure about, pause, rewind, go watch them again. Okay, make some notes in your book as well. And then what I'd like you to do is, in the booklet that I sent out, you need to go to the Sedimentary Rock section. Okay, you need to read this to remind yourself, and then you need to answer all of the comprehension questions. So you need to start from question number 18 and answer up to question 26. Okay, so this question 26 here, this is all one page for this question. It's just a simulation of the weathering and sedimentary rock forming process. And you need to answer these questions down here at the bottom. And then once you get to this one here, you can stop there. All right?